This is a matter of some controversy in the area of philosophy that studies critical thinking. I have a short definition. In 5 words, or less, it's the art of being right. And I don't mean the art of sort of being a smarty pants, prevailing an argument. I mean, it's the art of making the right call. It's about judgment. It's about truth or accuracy in judgment. Critical thinking is doing what it takes to be more right more often. Or conversely, doing what it takes to avoid the kind of stupid mistakes that people so often make. Okay, that's pretty easy to understand, I think. That's fundamentally what critical thinking is. Yeah, we started using argument mapping in a critical thinking subject at the University of Melbourne that I was teaching, where I had been using traditional techniques. These appeared to me to be failing. Students were not much better at the end than they were at the beginning. I looked at the research literature and found that there was a lot of pessimism about any efforts to try to teach critical thinking. And so I thought, look, there must be a way. And how might we do this? The approach I took was an argument mapping based approach. I said, look, let's get students to understand the structure of argument and be able to build these structures, to evaluate these structures. We developed software to help them do that, and we went from a theory-based curriculum to a practice-based curriculum. We said critical thinking is a skill, and like any skill, tennis, music, language, you name it, it only comes through lots of practice. And the better the quality of practice, the more quickly you're going to progress. And the problem with traditional critical thinking instruction is very much the problem with traditional artificial intelligence, is that it took a theory-based approach. It says, as long as you understand the rules, right? If you have the theory, if you have an intellectual conception, you'll be then able to deploy that. I think that's deeply mistaken, and that what we did is say, we'll give you just enough theory to get by. A certain amount of theory helps, but fundamentally what you need is practice. And so we tried to cram as much argument mapping-based practice into a subject as we could. We measured these students before and after, at the beginning of the semester and at the end. We did this over a number of years, gradually refined our techniques, and we got to the point where we were reliably getting substantial gains in critical thinking. By substantial, I mean about 0.8 of a standard deviation of performance on the test. That's a standard way that these things are measured. And that was well above what the kinds of gains that students were showing in other kinds of circumstances. It was approximately equivalent to the gain in critical thinking that you'd expect students to show over an entire undergraduate education. So what we proved is that using the right methods, you can accelerate the gain in critical thinking from a university education into 1 semester. Now, universities generally say that critical thinking is amongst the most important things that they teach. Well, if that's true, you can compress it to 1 semester and wonder what the rest of it's for. But it's not a magic wand in the sense that it's not. Other people have tried implementing argument mapping in their instruction. They've done it in all sorts of different ways. Everybody thinks that they can adapt it to their circumstances and do it a little bit better for them. And in the most recent meta-analysis that we've done of studies of attempts to teach critical thinking using argument mapping, you see a wide variety of gains, all from virtually nothing all the way through to greater than 1 standard deviation. So it matters enormously how well you do it, right? It has to be done properly. And if you do, it's clear that if you do it properly, you can substantially accelerate critical thinking skill gains. Why does that happen? I think it's fairly straightforward. There are 2 fundamental things. One is that it is a framework for practice, and students engage in a lot of practice. Second is that it's the form of the practice, and what students are getting through this practice is mental templates that they can bring to bear on argumentation and evidence when they encounter it in ordinary circumstances. Students up to that point had never had a clear idea of what it is to have a structured argument. They had this very fuzzy sense of how arguments, what they are and how they hang together, and how to evaluate them. You can't evaluate an argument unless you're clear about what it is. So by providing these visual mental templates, we give students kind of a leg up when it comes to actually dealing with arguments and evaluating them. So that's not everything about critical thinking. There are many other aspects of critical thinking that we didn't necessarily cover, or at least only covered incidentally in the course of an argument mapping based curriculum. But focusing on this core part of critical thinking, we're able to reliably get substantial gains. I think it would be possible to make really substantial differences on a large scale to critical thinking skills at, for example, a major university, if the university was prepared to invest the resources. That's basically not happened anywhere that I've seen. There's a lot of talk about the desire to improve critical thinking, but it's all, as far as 98% of it is sort of just motherhood statements and so forth. Basically, most instructors want to teach what's interesting to them, and they don't want to be subject to any kind of rigorous external evaluation as to the effectiveness of what they're actually doing. And so the situation remains that universities, generally speaking, make very little difference. A book came out last year, a big American study, which found that around half of students actually make no progress at all in critical thinking at university. It's quite a remarkable result, but that's the in a sense the bad news. And every one of those universities would be places where say, yes, we teach critical thinking. We can get glimpses of some of the directions that in the near term. The fact is, these days, most of us find our iPhones or our smartphones indispensable. We are definitely more capable. We are smarter in certain ways with iPhones augmenting our natural biological cognitive capacities. So Google Glass is an obvious extension of that concept. I remember 10 years ago when we were conducting argument mapping workshops, we used to finish them off with Minority Report and the famous scene where Tom Cruise is using this huge visual display with bodily gestures, very inspirational stuff, but suggesting that kind of thing would of course be reduced down to the size where it could be projected onto our retina, and effectively that's what we've got with the Google Glass type of arrangement. How argument mapping will be incorporated into that kind of technology, I just don't know yet. I don't think anybody's tried. I certainly haven't heard of anybody trying that, but I can't imagine that it wouldn't happen. I would say argument mapping software is still in very early stages of development. I mean, we've got some packages. There are a range of different software packages out there, but as compared with another favourite intelligence, I think the Office suite, the Microsoft Office suite, is a very powerful set of intelligence augmentation tools. Particularly, my favourites, Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. People love to pour scorn on these programs, but that's they're taking for granted an enormous amount, and the power that something like Word gives us to manipulate thoughts on the page is just extraordinary. It's worth taking a moment to appreciate that. So if you compare the current day argument mapping software with current day, for example, Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, it's really taking the current argument mapping software is really like MacWrite 1.0, I think, by comparison, in terms of its the amount of usability design that's gone into it, the amount of functionality that it's got. It really, really very, very crude. And so I do hold out the hope that we will see much more powerful, much more usable forms of argument mapping technology in the future. Right now, I'm not sure where the funding for that is going to come from, because I do have a certain amount of experience in trying to commercialise argument mapping software, and it's a bit of a hard sell. It's an interesting topic in itself. Is in philosophy, but right now these days I call myself, I think of myself not as a philosopher, but as an applied epistemologist, which schools of thought have influenced me most strongly. And if I go back to my undergraduate days, I was fascinated by the mind-body problem, and I was influenced then by sort of artificial intelligence, and it seemed like some kind of a solution to the mind-body problem. When I went to graduate school at Pittsburgh, I came under the influence of John Hoagland, American philosopher of mind, who himself was a student of Hubert Dreyfus, and so I was very strongly influenced by those two figures. Dreyfus, of course, himself influenced by Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, and I came to realise that there was a sort of level of understanding of what it would take to be intelligent in the way at least that human beings are intelligent, that artificial intelligence researchers were entirely oblivious to, and that the kinds of difficulties that they were encountering back in the 80s were entirely predictable. In fact, Hubert Dreyfus did predict them. It unfolded exactly as he predicted in his famous book, What Computers Can't Do. If you actually had a better philosophical understanding of what it takes to be intelligent. And so basically I was a complete convert. And so I then went on to study a certain amount of Heidegger and was strongly influenced by Heidegger, which sounds a little bit strange for somebody who comes out of a sort of Anglo-Australian, American, analytic philosophical tradition. So it was through the reading of Heidegger that I realised that artificial intelligence, or I should say through Heidegger via Dreyfus, that I realised that artificial intelligence in its then current form really didn't have any significant prospects for producing human scale intelligence, let alone superior intelligence. If there was ever going to be an artificial intelligence, it would have to take some fundamentally different approach. So you couldn't rule that out happening. We'll never know how the future will unfold. You can't rule anything in or out sort of comprehensively, but you could be highly confident that the solution would have to be very different. And this is not refuted by the fact that you can design a computer by fairly traditional methods to play chess. I mean, chess is a very highly restricted domain, and it is possible to have intelligence that is superior to human intelligence, although different in kind, in these very narrowly restricted domains. But it's still the case that speech recognition, for example, is a very dodgy business. This is 30, 40 years after people thought that this would be pretty a bit of a pushover. It's that's just an example. That's just speech recognition, let alone language comprehension. Is still a long way off as far as I can tell. So having in a sense given up on the AI dream, the classic AI dream, or the good old-fashioned AI dream, as John Hoagland described it, I became interested in, how can you improve human thinking? If we can't create computers to be at least as smart as us, how can we go back to square one, so to speak, and improve human thinking? I was then teaching critical thinking and became increasingly interested in intelligence augmentation, that is IA, intelligence augmentation, as opposed to AI, artificial intelligence. And pretty much all my work since then has been in one way or another, in this area of intelligence augmentation. Having a couple of decades ago given up on the good old-fashioned AI sort of dream, I turned my attention to how you might improve human thinking, and in particular how you might improve critical thinking. And much of my work since then has been in this area of intelligence augmentation, that is IA, as opposed to AI, that is artificial intelligence. Although it hasn't necessarily been under that heading. I haven't conceived myself as an intelligence augmenter. I've thought of myself rather as an applied epistemologist. That is, an applied epistemologist is somebody who's concerned with how it is that we come to know anything. We come to know anything by using sort of methods and tools. And the question for the applied epistemologist is, can those methods and tools be improved? And one way or another, that's what I do for a living in my consulting firm and in the various kinds of software exercises that I've engaged in over the years. There is a certain amount of use of formal methods in philosophy. However, I'd say in general, the dominant methodology in philosophy has been to try to tighten up informal deliberation. So if you look at classic Plato's dialogues, you'll see people arguing back and forth in ways that would be quite familiar to anybody who's got a 10-year-old child, and quite familiar to anybody who observes the way argumentation happens in Parliament or on TV, Q&A or that sort of program. So philosophers say, well, the way to do philosophy is to do that kind of thing, but to do it more rigorously. And so they have a kind of kit bag of terminology, for example, of distinctive terms, and some sorts of practices, argumentation practices that they bring in, they get trained in, and they deploy. My view is that these only take you so far, and that the technologies are fundamentally, at the end of the day, they're inadequate, and that this is the reason why so much of contemporary philosophy is actually such barren territory. You've got lots of very smart people who are trying to wrestle with philosophical problems that you can only make so much progress on given a certain set of tools. Now, I'm not arguing here to say, for example, shifting to predicate calculus or some other purely formal language. That isn't the solution either. What I think in between the tightened informal deliberation of standard philosophy and the use of purely formal methods, there's semi-formality. And what I think philosophy needs in order to make more progress is to develop better semi-formal methodologies. And I can't argue mapping is a kind of semi-formal methodology.